How will the Renters' Rights Bill affect landlords and letting agents? Today I'm joined by Suzanne Smith, who is the blog owner of the Independent Landlord. She is both a lawyer and also a landlord, and she has a famous blog and YouTube channel with thousands and thousands of subscribers and viewers. Thanks for joining me today, Suzanne.
Pleased to be here.
We're filming this in the middle of February. The Renters' Right Bill is going through the Lords as we speak. Hopefully we'll have this out towards the end of February, or if not very early March. There's a lot of people running around like headless chickens about the Renters' Rights Bill. What I want to do is talk about what do we know about the Renters' Right Bill, what don't we know about the Renters' Right Bill, what is all the BS and what isn't true about the Renters' Right Bill, and then finally what should we be telling our tenants both as landlords and also letting agents. So let's kick off. What do we actually know about the Renters' Right Bill? Talk to me.
Well, we know it will abolish Section 21. We know it will end fixed terms. And we know that because it's in the long title of the bill and they can't change that. And it was in the Labour manifesto. We know that it will change the way that we have tenancies at the moment from assured short-hold tenancies to assured tenancies. And so this means that they're going to be open-ended and periodic, and we'll all be 2 months notice away from the end of a tenancy if that's what a tenant wants to do. So no more fixed terms, and that's going to be a big change for some landlords, but not for landlords like me. I have long-term tenants, and they mostly just move on when they want a bigger house or if they want to move out of the area. I already accept pets. That's another thing that's in it. I already accept people that have universal credit, for instance. So that's no change. So I actually think, and this is probably contrary to a lot of what you hear, for people who have long-term tenants, families, in houses, there's going to be a whole load of admin to do with the database and new ways to increase rent and all that sort of thing. And in terms of the Decent Home Standard and AWAB's law, it really is just saying what we should be doing anyway as good landlords. It's already in the law. Where I think it is going to be a big change is with student landlords who up until now, have had the academic year, the security of an academic year, and also HMOs, because they're going to be having constant turnover and they won't know that they've got people for a minimum of 6 months. And so the turnover for HMO landlords and student landlords is going to be less predictable, and it's going to be tougher for them.
Particularly student lets. If you've got a
Yes.
tenant leaving after a few months, that's going to be really hard work, isn't it?
Yeah,
To get someone in halfway through a year.
absolutely. And I think like with student lets at the moment, you have a joint tenancy. And so you've got 4 friends that sign up. If one of them drops out, then the rest of them have to pay for the rest of the academic year, or they get in somebody else. Whereas in the new world, if somebody wants to drop out of university, they give notice to quit. And it'll either break up that joint tenancy, or landlords will enter into instead of joint tenants, they'll be doing individual rooms. And they won't have there'll be no incentive for that group of 4 friends to find somebody to replace someone. So I can understand why student landlords and HMO landlords are very concerned about the Renters' Rights Bill.
So student landlords won't be able to do the jointly and severally responsible clause.
Well, because if somebody serves a notice to quit, it terminates the joint tenancy.
So that mean a new tenancy will have to be done on a student?
Potentially, unless they do the deed of surrender route for one of the tenants. But it means that potentially all of them could just terminate the agreement as well. And so I think probably what will happen is student landlords will let by the room, because at least then they're all individual. And that's more admin. And there will be more voids. And I know that there's been a lot of lobbying going on, and we're still not there yet. Something might happen, I'm
Because if you think about it, if the landlord gets someone in, they're not getting someone in from that you know, when four students come together, they're all
Yeah.
friends. You're going to have strangers living in your home, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my daughters is in an HMO. She's doing a PhD, and they've been in the same house for 3 years now. And when somebody's moved, they've just found someone. But from the student's point of view, it gives them more flexibility because they might not want to pay for the summer. Now, if you're doing a PhD, you do because you're working all year round. There will be, and it has become a cliche, unintended consequences of this.
See, again, I learn something every day, is that students don't like to pay for the summer months, but landlords force them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because landlords either will do it for 10, 11 or 12 months. And often students, particularly if they're, say they're in their third year at university and then they're going away to start a job or to another university, they don't want to pay after they finish their exams in May. Yet, typically, those tenancies go from September to August.
There's going to be a lot of disappointed student landlords, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah, and there already is. There already are, should I say? I think that it will make it more difficult for students to find accommodation because it's going to be less attractive to be a student landlord unless they change the rules. And of course, you've got, so-called PBSA, purpose-built student accommodation. They're outside of the Renters' Rights Bill. And so they're not caught by this, but nobody's really sure exactly what PBSA is. I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago with David Smith, and it's not easy to know exactly what purpose built is. So there's like a true two tracks for student landlords. One if you're a PBSA and you can carry on as you are, and another for everyone else. And so it is going to be tricky for student landlords going forward.
Let's come back to this abolishing of Section 21. A lot of people are worried, particularly about that. Should they be?
Well, the vast majority of landlords never use Section 21. And I look at things differently. That I worked as an in-house lawyer for 25 years, and I was always looking at managing risk. And the best way to manage risk is to avoid problems. And so it all comes down to tenant selection. And if you have good tenants, then you're unlikely to need to terminate the tenancy agreement with them. I have been a landlord now. This is my 6th year. I've never had rent arrears, and I have, absolutely lovely tenants, but I spend a lot of time looking for good tenants. So with Section 21, if you're wanting to sell up, then you will be able to sell up with the new Ground 1A. It will be a bit more complicated, and you're not going to be able to test the market. You're going to have to price properly. And I know it's a big thing that you're always talking about on this podcast is getting the right price to sell, because landlords won't be able to re-let for another year. Actually, it's a bit longer than another year.
And that's something which, again, I don't think a lot of letting agents are aware of, and landlords, is the ability to ask a tenant to leave and the rules about timings about when you can and can't sell the property.
Yes.
Share with me that what you're aware of that.
Okay. So in the bill as it is at the moment, landlords will be able to serve a Section 8 Ground 1A notice. It's a new ground, which means that they intend to sell the property. They'll only be able to do that so that it expires after the first 12 months of the tenancy. And that the clock doesn't restart when the Renters' Rights Bill comes into effect. But it means if they've lived there for 12 months, the landlord will be able to serve that notice. And
Sorry, does that mean that when, let's just say, for argument's sake, the Renters' Right Bill, everything starts on, say, the 1st of June and everything gets moved over to a rolling tenancy. Does the 12 months start at that point?
No, it starts when they moved in. So the clocks don't reset for that notice period. And then once the tenant has left, there's a restricted period, which is, well, the short version is it's 12 months. So they can't re-let the property for 12 months from that date or put it on Airbnb. So it means that the landlords, when they're selling, they again have to be very realistic on the price and be prepared to have a void until they wait. That they could move family in, but they can't actually market it for letting or have a let.
Do you think many people? So let's just get that nailed straight. Okay, let's assuming that the tenant's been in for more than 12 months, and again,
Yeah.
that's from when they actually
Yeah.
moved in. The landlord can serve a notice.
4 months notice, yeah.
4 months.
Yeah.
Can the property be marketed during those 4 months?
It could be marketed for sale, but it can't be marketed for letting.
Right. Okay. So they give 4 months notice.
Yeah.
If the tenant moved halfway, let's just say they said, "Well, I want to move out." That's fine, isn't it?
Yeah.
But if the tenant decided they didn't want people to come around the house, can the tenant refuse viewers?
Yeah, well, they do have the right to quiet possession, and so it is very difficult if the tenant doesn't want people to come around. But you would then have to go to court and get an order for possession, which is the same as it is anyway now, because most people move out when they have a Section 21 notice now, and you don't have to go to court. I myself sold a flat a couple of years ago in Cambridge, and it was my accidental landlord flat, and I served the Section 21 notice. They moved out, everything was fine. And so we don't know whether that will be the case under the new regime, whether people will just move out when they get a Section 8 notice. But if people are wanting to sell with vacant possession, and typically you get more money when you sell with vacant possession, and you can tidy up the house and present it for sale, then that will take longer once the Renters' Rights Bill comes into effect.
So the tenant moves out, and let's assume I haven't been able to put the house on the market
Yeah.
to sell. I've now got 12 months,
Yeah,
and I can't relet it
yeah,
or put Airbnb on
Yeah.
it. So I've got no rent coming in.
yeah,
The average sale time is taking 19 weeks.
yeah.
Only 53% of homes that get put on the market actually end up selling.
Yeah.
The rest fall through. What is the consequences if someone does try and do a dirty and put it up for rent again?
Well, there are lots of sanctions for this, and it's a breach of lots of the rules. So it's not something I would recommend. But what they need to do, and I know this is something that you talk about on your podcast a lot, is get good lawyers. Get the lawyers that you can deal with directly, that don't have these unqualified people, these kind of factories of conveyances, and make sure that the people who are buying from you have good lawyers as well. I mean, even fairly recently, I bought a property in 6 weeks, but then I had everything ready because just as you said on one recent one, you've got to do all the anti-money laundering things, get all your information together, and then just go for it. And I think if the estate agents realise this, then this is a really good marketing opportunity. We can say, we will do the best thing that we can to help you sell your property as quickly as possible.
Well, if you think about it, if you're putting the property up for market during those 4 months,
Yeah.
whilst you're giving notice to the tenant, you can prepare the contract pack.
Exactly.
So you've got a contract, you've got a property ready to exchange contracts when it comes on the market.
And the landlords will just have to pay the upfront costs and pay for the searches, etc. And then if they're really, because they will, if they're selling with the new regime, they're going to be committed sellers, because they understand that they won't be able to get rent for another 12 months. And so there's a lot they can do to get ready. So like when I sold the property in Cambridge, when the tenants moved out, we went and we redecorated the place, had it ready for sale on the Monday, and it sold almost immediately. Fantastic letting, fantastic estate agents there, Bidwells.
They are a very good agent in Cambridge. Yeah, but it's going to require agents, sales departments to talk with lettings departments and things like that. Yeah.
But it's a great opportunity for estate agents and to help landlords, because when you're running a business, you succeed if you understand your customers and their pain points. And I think if estate agents realise this, then they can.
The point is who's going to police this? When you've got tenants, and with the issue with deposits, they have the right to claw the money back. So they would almost be tenacious to try and get the money back.
Well, the Renters' Rights Bill has real teeth, and they've given the Rent Repayment Orders a glow up. So not only are they increasing the maximum amount of rent that a tenant can claim to be repaid from 12 months to 24 months.
24 months.
24 months, so it's the last 2 years up to that. But
And the money goes back to the tenant.
money goes back to the tenant, and there are 2 new offences that are relevant here. In fact, there are 6 new offences, but there are 2 new offences. One is knowingly or recklessly using possession ground incorrectly. So say they're saying that they're going to sell and they don't sell, for instance, and they've got no intention of selling.
So that intention is that's a bad intention.
Yeah.
From day one they're always going to be false.
Yeah, so because the rules say that they have to intend to sell, and if that turned out to be a sham, then the tenants, and they find out, the tenants could get a rent repayment order.
Okay, but then there's going to be other landlords that intend to sell, and yes, I was going to sell, and then for whatever reason life got in the way, and I've got to put it back up for rent, or the sale fell through.
Yeah. And if they do that, there's a separate new offence under the Renters' Rights Bill that will stop them doing that as well. So that's marketing a property for let or for Airbnb in that restricted period. That's
12
a new
months.
offence. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So it has real
Why aren't
teeth.
people talking about this?
I don't know. People are banging on about lots of things, but it means that I read something that Paul Champlina spoke about the other day, that they've had a big uptick in Section 21s. It's certainly going to be a lot easier to regain possession before the Renters' Rights Bill comes into effect, and you will be able to regain.
But if you go and put another tenant in, you're going to still have the same problems, because on swap over day, when we go for the new act, everyone has the same tenancy. What are these landlords doing if they're giving Section 21s? Are they selling them up?
Yes, I think there are, certainly in my Facebook group, there are a lot of people that are thinking of selling up at the moment, and I actually think, in many respects, that the Renters' Rights Bill isn't the biggest thing that's going to make landlords sell up. I think it's EPCs.
Well, we're going to do a separate. We are going to do a separate video on that. Let's carry on back to Renters' Rights Bill. So, the Section 21 doesn't really concern you, but putting the property on the market, getting possession back, there's a huge trap there, isn't there?
Well, you've just got to know what you're doing, and estate agents need to understand this as well, and letting agents, and educate.
Is there any fines for agents on this?
Yes, I think they're.
You believe so? That's fine. No, again, that's where you have to follow Suzanne on her blog. Right. Let's move on and talk about rents not being able to be increased with Section 13s, or they can in a certain way.
Well, that's going to be a big change, potentially. So, in the old days before COVID, most letting agents and landlords didn't increase rents for existing tenants.
Yeah, it's almost like a 2-tier market, isn't there?
Yeah. So beforehand, if you had good tenants, you mostly didn't increase your rent. And then we had inflation and interest rates going up. And now it is more common for landlords to put up the rent. Under the new system, there's not going to be the annual cycle of renewals, which I know many letting agents are unhappy about that. But landlords will be able to put up the rent once a year, but they won't be able to do it now through agreement. They will have to use or a rent review clause. So all rent review clauses will be null and void on the stroke of midnight when it comes into force, which actually can be good for some landlords, because they might have quite low rent review clauses and maybe they missed a few years and the rent is a long way behind the market. But when the Renters' Rights Bill comes into effect, that part of it comes into effect, we will have to use Section 13, which is a fairly simple notice. You send that off and it will have to be 2 months instead of 1 month as it is now. But where they changed it is, at the moment, a tenant really it's a bit risky for them to appeal against the Section 13 notice by complaining to the first tier tribunal, because the first tier tribunal will look to see what the market rent is. And if it's higher than the rent proposed by the landlord in the notice period, the tribunal has the right to put it up and to what the market rent is. So they may end up paying more, and there's no, apart from certain circumstances of hardship, the rent will be backdated, the rent increase will be backdated. But it's going to change. They're changing it so that tenants will have no downside to challenging a rent increase, because the rent first tier tribunal will not be able to increase the rent over and above what it is in the notice, and will come into effect, new rent will come into effect after the tribunal comes to a decision. So it will delay the rent increase.
Have you ever been to a first tier
No,
tribunal?
no.
Is it a person? Is it a form? Or is
Oh,
it,
they're judges. It is. It's not the ombudsman. Quite a few people think it's an ombudsman or a redress scheme, but it is a court. But I think it's slightly less formal than, say, the High Court.
and does it cost money for a tenant to apply?
No.
Does it cost the landlord to go to the tenant?
I'm not sure.
Because we did say at the start of the video, there's certain things we're not sure of.
Yeah.
But if you're not careful, the courts could be flooded with lots of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And who decides what a market rent is?
Well, the court will take evidence from the landlord and from the tenant. And so this is actually a really good opportunity for letting agents, if they have their database and they can market this to say, well, when we're serving your Section 13 notice, we're going to tell you what the market rent is. And therefore, you will know what you can go up to and then still know that you'll get it through. But what I suspect will happen is that landlords, with inflation going down a bit, maybe they'll just not bother putting the rent up so much, or just put it up by a really small amount. But if they've got tenants that they get on well with and they've always been reasonable, then maybe they'll just be able to put it through. There's one important thing, is that if you serve a notice, Section 13 notice, you can negotiate it. And so I suspect that some letting agents will serve the notice and then have a chat to the tenant and agree to reduce the rent. And if they do that, reduce it as opposed to what's in the notice. If they do that, then that will be valid and the tenant won't go to court, and it will start when you want. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for letting agents here to help landlords.
There's an opportunity, if you think, for letting agents to sell their services to self-managed landlords here.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I certainly would be interested in that. But of course, it can't be too expensive, because if you're only putting the rent up £25 a month, then you're not going to be paying £500 for someone to do this, or even £250 is not going to be worth it.
I mean, as you know, I'm a bit of a property data geek, and there's so much data out there. I tell you what, which I think is something that gets missed all the time, is pound per square foot. Especially in London, there are websites out there that will give you the average pound per square foot for an apartment in Chiswick. And again, that's particularly important when it comes to valuing a house. It is the actual capital value, but for the rents, again, there's huge opportunities there.
Yeah, and I think also for the prop tech firms to sell that directly to landlords, because more than half of landlords do it themselves, and there's going to be demand for that.
What about this database? Do you think that's going to be an issue?
It's potentially going to be really good, because the government says that they're going to use it as kind of a means to communicate with landlords and to tell them about things. Landlords will be able to see what all of their certificates are, assuming that it's what we expect, the gas safeties, the EPC, etc. And what is going to be really good is that local authorities will be able to have a look at it and see who the rogue landlords are. I mean, I bought a property from a big landlord a few years ago, and it had an unsatisfactory EICR. So there were tenants living in the property and the electrics weren't safe. And in the current system, there's no way that anyone would know about that. But under the new system, unless the landlord is boldly marketing property and not registering on the database, then that will get picked up. And letting agents won't want to take the risk to take properties that aren't on the database, because it's not just the landlord that has to be on the database, that the property has to be on the database. And so I think it's a good thing.
Is this like a publicly available database?
Yeah, well, we don't know. And it's one of the things I am concerned about is I don't want my personal address to be on there. And I know that there are lots of HMO landlords who get inundated with junk mail because their address is published. But the Ministry of Housing is doing a kind of a mini consultation at the moment, and I've written in about that. So that's one of the points that I'm going to be talking to them about. Is there the 2.3 million landlords having all our personal information out there is a concern, and maybe there's a way that they can close it off so only legitimate people can have access to it.
The last thing we need is letting agents trying to tout landlords, isn't it?
Well, there's also the question of fraud. It's bad enough with the land registry at the moment. There are people that try and defraud landlords out of their properties. But it's going to be really easy if they do allow. It's going to be really easy for fraudsters to see which properties are in the private rented sector, because they're all going to be there on a database.
I mean, and then there's extra hurdles like the ombudsman's scheme for the letting sector. What do you think this is going to all drive more landlords into letting agents' hands?
I don't know. I mean, I think that the days of the amateur landlord are numbered. It doesn't. You can have a professional attitude even with 1 or 2 properties, and you can be unprofessional with 100 properties. I think that landlords will need to get educated on it if they're not already. And I know the recent English private landlord survey that came out in November showed really very few landlords understand all the changes.
Do you think most letting agents understand it?
I don't know, but I would be surprised if they know all the ins and outs of it, because it's complicated. I mean, the rules about rent in advance, it took me as a solicitor about 2 days to understand them.
Well, I wanted to come on to that point. Surely not taking rent up front is going to, the unintended consequences is that those with poorer credit histories are not going to be able to rent homes so much.
Yeah, that's a big problem, and particularly for overseas students as well. But my beef with the rent in advance rules isn't so much about people not being able to pay 6 months up front, because I think that's just a subsection of the PRS. But where the whole of the PRS is going to be affected is if you sign, if a tenant signs a tenancy agreement, and before the landlord or the letting agent signs, the letting agent or landlord asks for the rent, that's going to be a breach of the Tenant Fees Act. But if they ask for the rent 2 minutes after they sign, it's going to be okay. And when I say the rent, that's that first month's rent. So often at the moment, and it depends on what system you have, there's the holding deposit, and then the tenant applicant will pay the tenancy deposit and the first month's rent together. And no one really takes much notice about exactly when that's paid and when you sign. But unless the rules are changed, it will be a breach of the Tenant Fees Act to ask for the tenancy deposit, or the tenancy deposit's fine, but to ask for that first month's rent before both parties have entered into the contract. And I think it's unnecessarily complicated. And I've written to them and told them that. I mean, I don't know whether they'll pay any attention to what some landlord says, but it does seem to be a bit overly complicated when they're wanting to stop landlords asking for 6-12 months rent up front, that they're also affecting how that first month's rent is paid. So we'll have to see what happens about that.
Are you worried about the Renters' Rights Bill?
No, not for me personally.
Do you think most landlords and then secondly letting agents should be worried about it?
I think it very much depends on your perspective. So student landlords, HMO landlords, I can understand why they have concerns. So they need to get prepared for it. They need to understand what the risks are and how to mitigate it. I mean, we're always being faced with laws that we don't like. It's what I spent 25 years doing. And so as they say on Love Island, it is what it is. And we're just going to have to figure out how to work around it.
How do people read your blog? Where's your blog hosted and where's your video channel, just in case someone's seen this and think, I like that lady?
Well, if you put Suzanne and landlord into Google, I will come up. But the actual blog post, the blog is theindependentlandlord.com. And if you put independent landlord, it will come up. And I'm the same on YouTube. And I have a free weekly newsletter that I send out with my take on the week. And that's my take as a lawyer and a landlord, and that goes at the moment February to 8,000 subscribers, including a lot of letting agents.
Thank you for your time today, Suzanne.
Thank you.